Well, I'm joined this evening by my dear friend, Dean LeBaron, who is in Casey Key, Florida. How are you, Dean?
I'm very fine, John, and thank you very much. And glad to have you here, but you did not need to send me the gift of polar weather that you have sent here. That was not necessary, but you're kind.
Well, we Canadians bring interesting gifts, so you had to put up with a bit of cold weather, but it's all relative, and it was certainly very pleasant for us, and I understand you're getting warmer weather now.
Yeah, well, that's good. Thank you. Well, we learned a lot together, and maybe we can talk about some of that.
Yeah, well, let's talk about Kondrachev Winter, because you and I recreated for a video a meeting between Nikolai Kondrachev, the famous Russian economist, and yourself, and it was quite fun because the world today is heading deep into Kondrachev Winter.
There are so many investment people around that just by standing up and saying your pitch about what the forecast is isn't enough.
Forecasting, as you mentioned in this video, is a very tough game because it takes a lot of guts to just say to investors that one can't figure out where things are going.
Just as a coincidence, this morning, another good friend of mine, and you might even know him, a fellow named Seth Warner, sent me a note saying he had just turned all of his clients' money back to the clients and said he's just going to sit and do nothing for a while. He'll tell them when he'd like to have it back. That is extraordinarily rare.
And investment professionals, as we know, are paid to be very specific about an investment forecast. And I wonder if you could tell our listeners about your take on all of this.
Yes. When we're going through a change such as we may be doing at the moment, a Kondrachev long wave change, we are dropping off all of the lessons that we have learned for the last 70-odd years, and we're going to learn some new lessons, a new market period. We don't know what that period is, but we do know, I think quite convincingly, that it is not what we have experienced in the past. And the very investors who are going to get the most tricked by this are the ones who have been most skillful in the last 70 years. In other words, maybe you and me. But you have to approach the future with an open mind, and my, that's difficult.
Now, the banking industry in Europe is troubled, and we've gone through this excessive stimulation that has buoyed markets up for the past 5 years. Give us your reflections on some of the things that are going on.
Please excuse my terminology, but banking is a con game. When we go and put money on deposit in a bank, we know very well if we turn around and ask for our particular money right back, they will say, I'm sorry, Mr. LeBaron or Mr. Budden, we don't have it. We have invested it in somebody's scheme who came in the other door. We don't have your money, but we'll give you somebody else's money. They came in and we'll hand that to you. That is the definition of a Ponzi scheme. However, if everybody is at the door at the same time, because we don't trust the banks, as indeed a market decline of 50% by Deutsche Bank, as occurred recently, suggests that some people don't trust the bank. That, in this case, is a problem, and the proverbial run on the bank becomes an option. Now, governments try to stop that, and central banks try to stop it, but at the moment, central banks are not widely believed. They have, for 15 years, been pumping up banks, and so we don't really believe they can do it anymore. As the expression goes, we are out of ammunition. We'll see what happens under those conditions.
And, of course, some of these deals or transactions that money from banks goes into or is tied up in are derivatives. And in the case of Deutsche Bank, and I'm just giving broad estimates, here's a stock that's come down from $135 a share in 2007 to $17 today. It has a market cap of $18 billion, which is tiny in banking terms, but they have notional derivatives that are out there. They represent something like $55 trillion, so just a rounding error can put them out of business, and the European Central Bank has to be very worried about the state of European banks.
And we're trying to do the usual things to pump up confidence. Jamie Dimon, the chairman of J.P. Morgan, widely publicized the fact that he invested $26 million of his own money in 500,000 shares of his own bank. Now, he didn't really need that as an investment activity, but he was trying to do what the old J.P. Morgan did, standing on the floor of the stock exchange, saying my son and I are buying stocks today, and he thought this might do it. I mean, it's a pretty thin tissue of confidence, I think.
Well, doing a little bit of history, in our video, of course, I portrayed Nikolai Kondratyev, who is the famed Russian economist who died in 1938 by firing squad at the behest of Joseph Stalin. And he, of course, was the originator of the long wave theory. That's named after him. And then Schumpeter took the theory even further. But that was 1938, and I called it the ghost of 38 because that was just after FDR had raised interest rates, raised bank reserves, and raised taxes. And the next year, that was in 37, and the next year in 38, the stock market went down 50%. And so this is very unnerving. The Fed has just raised interest rates, and the world is an uncertain place. So that's sort of long-winded. I want to throw the ball to you now.
Well, I'm going to call you Nikolai, or better, Professor Kondratyev, because I hope that the stock market doesn't go down next year 50% because of your excellent performance. And Bolshoi, Basibas Bolshoi, your performance here in describing the long wave and what may occur. If Professor Kondratyev, the other one, the real one, was back with us again, he might look at this period and say, I'm comfortable here. I know what's happening. I have been here about 4 or 5 times in earlier cycles, in earlier history before. So this is not however, but for the institutional investors like us, they say, my goodness, this is different than the last 50 to 70 years, so I can't stand it. I don't know what to do. Now somebody's coming along, doing flash trades and dark pools and running algorithms that I've never seen before. So it's a totally different game than we're familiar with. And under those circumstances, we don't do well. But the best thing for us to do, in my opinion, under these circumstances, is to stand aside or find an asset that is likely to be nearer liquidity than anything else. And a bank deposit, demand deposit is not that. But gold might be the best form of liquidity that we can find. At least the Asians and Indians think so, and I'm afraid North Americans are going to learn the same thing.
Well, I liked your observation that gold, of course, for the past 5 years has been treated as a commodity, and now it's resorting to its traditional role, which has always been as a hard currency and an alternative to fiat currencies. And we've begun to see a bit better performance, and in weaker currencies than the U.S. dollar, it has been performing quite well. For instance, the Canadian dollar value of gold is close to $1,700 an ounce.
Well, it's not only a value, but you can extend it even beyond that. I do know some people who own some gold but are hoarding guns and ammunition because they figure they're going to have to perform their own security to guard the gold that they have from burglars. And that's how bad they think things will become.
Now, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you for your take on the political circus that's going on in your country.
Well, it is a circus. I can only say that the American electorate gets the politicians it deserves. We've been a little bit sloppy in electing politicians in the past, and we're paying the price for it now. One of two things will happen. We will either elect one or another of the circus candidates, in which case there might be a possibility that there would be, of all things, a military takeover, because I can't believe that some of the candidates, if elected, would be tolerated by the American military to have its hand on the nuclear button. There's a strange thing in America in that there's only one person who can decide to fire a nuclear weapon or not, and that is the president. When you think of some of the people we have, that may well be a very scary item. Or there's a second alternative, is that some of the other people who haven't been seen may emerge. One of those might be Michael Bloomberg, who's thinking of having an independent candidacy. He may decide it's just foolish enough so that an independent candidate might win. I don't know whether that second alternative will occur or not, but it's better than the first one.
Well, to conclude, I think what I'd like to do is ask you in simple terms for your investment advice for the listener who is confounded and more recently becoming very concerned about the antics of markets.
Well, John, my investment advice is wrapped up in one word: don't. In all probability, we're still in a stage of uncertainty. Any investment advice, one side or another, may have a very high probability of being wrong. Unless you have a very clear position of what the future is going to be than I have, the thing to do is to do as little as possible if you can almost do nothing. Liquidity is becoming much more important than return. It used to be that we would invest on return on investment, and today you just invest on return, pure return. Do you get your money back, or as much of it as possible? And under those circumstances, the thing to do is, in my opinion, as little as possible. We may in the future, a year or two, find it's clearer, but at the moment I don't think it is.
Well, Dean, as always, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and it was a great pleasure seeing you, and